6:30 a.m., June 6, 1944. The ramp of landing craft 71 drops open. Before a single soldier can take one step forward, the machine guns open up. In the first 9 minutes on Omaha Beach, over 500 American soldiers are killed, wounded, or missing. The company commander radios back to headquarters. "There are too many dead men here." The generals watching from the command ship had already begun drafting the message. Omaha Beach, total failure. This is the story of what happened in those 9 minutes, and the small, almost accidental moments that changed the course of World War II. By the spring of 1944, Nazi Germany had occupied Western Europe for nearly 4 years. France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Norway, all under the iron grip of the Third Reich. The Soviet Union was bleeding on the Eastern Front, having already suffered over 20 million casualties. Stalin had been demanding a second front in the West for 2 years. The Allied plan was codenamed Operation Overlord, the largest amphibious invasion in human history. 5 beaches along the Normandy coastline in northern France were chosen as landing zones: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, Sword. Of the 5 beaches, military planners knew Omaha would be the hardest. What they didn't know was just how catastrophically wrong things would go. Omaha Beach was not just a beach, it was a killing ground, engineered by the Germans with terrifying precision. The beach itself stretched nearly 6 kilometers, but what made it deadly was its geography. Behind the sand rose a series of steep bluffs, between 30 and 50 meters high, that completely overlooked every inch of the shoreline below. The Germans had turned those bluffs into a fortress. 8 artillery bunkers with guns zeroed in on the waterline, 35 pillboxes armed with machine guns, rifles, and mortars, 4 tank positions dug directly into the hillside, over 1,000 obstacles on the beach itself, steel hedgehogs, wooden stakes, mines, and approximately 2,000 elite German soldiers from the 352nd Infantry Division. Here's the critical detail most people don't know. Allied intelligence had identified a weaker division holding Omaha, a training division, inexperienced men. But 3 weeks before D-Day, the Germans quietly rotated them out and replaced them with the 352nd, battle-hardened veterans from the Eastern Front. The Allies didn't know. The men stepping off those landing craft were walking into a trap they didn't know existed. The plan for Omaha Beach looked solid on paper. First, a massive aerial bombardment would destroy the German positions. Then naval guns would pound the beach for 40 minutes. By the time the infantry arrived, the defenses would be weakened, craters in the sand would provide cover, and the soldiers would advance inland with manageable resistance. That was the plan. Here's what actually happened. The aerial bombing, 329 B-24 Liberator bombers, released their payload too late. Afraid of hitting their own troops in the landing craft below, the bombardiers delayed by just a few seconds. Those few seconds pushed every single bomb inland, some landing up to 5 kilometers behind the German lines. 329 bombers, 13,000 bombs, 0 hits on German positions. Not a single German bunker was destroyed. The naval bombardment lasted only 40 minutes, not nearly long enough to neutralize fortified positions. And the ships, wary of running aground, fired from too far out to be accurate. Then came the tanks. The Allies had developed a secret weapon, the D.D. Sherman tank, a tank fitted with a flotation screen that could swim to shore. 32 of them were launched into the water to support the infantry. The waves were nearly 2 meters high. 27 of the 32 tanks sank within minutes of launch. Most crews never made it out. The infantry was on their own. The men of the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions had been awake for over 24 hours. Many had been seasick for hours in the rough channel waters. As the landing craft approached the shore, something was immediately wrong. The current had pushed many boats off course, some by over a kilometer. Men who trained for specific sections of beach found themselves in completely unfamiliar terrain, directly in front of German strongpoints they had never studied. Then the ramps dropped. The German machine guns were waiting. Company A of the 116th Infantry was the hardest hit. In the first minutes, nearly every officer was killed or wounded. Soldiers who jumped off the ramp into chest-deep water, weighed down by 30 kilograms of equipment, were cut down before they could take a single step. Some drowned. Their equipment pulled them under before they could surface. Men who survived described the chaos in haunting terms. The water was full of men. Some were moving, most were not. Within 9 minutes, Company A had lost over 90% of its fighting strength. 197 men landed. Fewer than 20 could still fight after 9 minutes. For 2 hours, the beach was paralyzed. Thousands of men lay flat against the sand, behind bodies, behind steel obstacles, behind the bodies of the men who had died in front of them. To move meant death. At 8:30 a.m., Brigadier General Norman Cota waded ashore with the second wave. He walked upright, in full view of German fire. He walked along the beach, stepping over the dead and wounded, until he reached a group of soldiers frozen behind a seawall. He looked at them, and he said something that has gone down in military history. "Two kinds of people are staying on this beach, the dead, and those who are going to die. Now let's get the hell out of here." Small groups began to move, not because the situation had changed, not because the German fire had stopped, but because of one man who refused to lie down. At the same time, the destroyers offshore made a desperate decision. Against orders, several destroyer captains pushed their ships as close to shore as possible, some in water so shallow their keels were scraping the seabed, and began direct fire on the German positions at nearly point-blank range. The combination of Cota's leadership, small unit breakthroughs, and the destroyers' direct fire began to crack the German defense. By noon, the first Americans were on top of the bluffs. By nightfall on June 6, 1944, the Allies had secured a foothold at Omaha Beach. The cost was devastating. Between 2,000 and 4,700 Allied casualties at Omaha Beach alone. Over 6,000 total Allied casualties across all 5 beaches on D-Day. The average age of the soldiers who died at Omaha, just 23 years old. Today, the Normandy American Cemetery holds 9,388 graves, each one a white marble cross or Star of David, set in perfectly straight rows on a bluff overlooking Omaha Beach. They look out at the same water their soldiers crossed on June 6, 1944. The foothold at Normandy became the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. Within 2 months, Paris was liberated. Within 11 months, Adolf Hitler was dead and the war in Europe was over. But here is what I want you to think about. The success of D-Day didn't come from perfect planning. The plan had failed. The bombers missed, the tanks sank, the boats landed in the wrong places. The success of D-Day came from individual soldiers making individual decisions in the worst possible circumstances. A destroyer captain who pushed his ship into dangerously shallow water. A general who walked upright through machine gun fire. A sergeant who decided, after 2 hours of hell, to stand up and move forward. History isn't always made by the powerful and the planned. Sometimes it's made by one person, in one moment, choosing not to stay on the beach. If you want to understand how the rest of the Normandy campaign unfolded, the breakout, the liberation of France, and the race to Berlin, that story is coming in the next few weeks. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. And before you go, one question for the comments. Which decision do you think was most critical to saving Omaha Beach? The destroyers going close to shore, or General Cota's leadership? I read every comment. I'll see you in the next one.